Welcome, everyone, to the day after Global Encryption Day and this fireside chat with Yashovardhan and Azad. My name is Tom Bowman, and I serve as Policy Counsel at the Center for Democracy and Technology, where I work on a wide range of issues related to national security and surveillance technologies, which includes representing CDT on the steering committee of the Global Encryption Coalition. Throughout the conversation today, feel free to put any questions in the chat. Unfortunately, I cannot promise that we will have time for questions, but we may be able to respond to some of the questions after the event. Today, I am joined by an esteemed guest, Yashovardhan Azad. Yasho is a distinguished former law enforcement and intelligence official with nearly 40 years of experience in national security and governance. From his beginnings in the Indian police service, he rose to become a special director in the Intelligence Bureau, India's premier internal security agency. He later served as the Secretary of Security to the Government of India, where he was the nation's top risk official responsible for protecting the Prime Minister and coordinating the National Crisis Management Group. Throughout his career, he handled critical assignments in counterterrorism, risk assessment for top political leadership, and international security. Following his retirement from the IPS, Yasho was appointed as a Central Information Commissioner, where he adjudicated appeals under India's Federal Right to Information Act, delivering over 8,000 judgments in an effort to ensure government transparency. He is a recipient of the Police Medal for Meritorious Services and the President of India's Medal for Distinguished Service. Today, he is a widely published columnist, TV commentator, and podcast host on a range of contemporary issues, and he has graciously agreed to share about 20 minutes of his time with us today. Yasho, welcome. Did I get anything wrong there? Anything you'd like to correct for the record?
Thank you very much, Tom. I'm really excited looking at this fireside chat and really want to congratulate you for the Society of Internet, which has been doing excellent work for the last 2 days, raising the consciousness on encryption issues, which is a wide-ranging debate all over the world today.
Well, thank you, Yasho, and hopefully we can keep moving that debate forward today with this fireside chat. Yasho, I want to start talking a little bit about your career in the highest levels of India's intelligence and security apparatus, tasked with critical missions like preventing terrorism and protecting national security. Because in the past, conventional rhetoric from many law enforcement officials was that strong end-to-end encryption was a major obstacle to these types of missions. But you've argued for a different perspective. So could you open our conversation by explaining a little bit about why you see robust, widespread encryption not as a threat to national security, but as a fundamental pillar of it?
I think you started absolutely correctly, Tom. You know, the debate which we've been seeing that in the classical mold is always, it's privacy versus the state security. And often this has clashed so many times, and we have not been able to find the real solution. Though there are solutions, but the opinions are divided too strongly. I do understand the needs of the law enforcement, and as you rightly said, I've been watching it throughout the years. But I do feel that there is a lot which the law enforcement should aspire to. I think there is a lot which when the law enforcement talk about the last point connectivity, because ultimately to trace any kind of a terrorist act and the origins, you have to go to the last point. But this is also important that the security of the state does not really mean cracking one of the terrorist cases. The security of the state also means public order and the combined safety and security of the private individuals. So when we are talking about the digital, architecture, which protects the freedom, which protects the access, which protects the overall being of an individual, it's important not to take this debate only as privacy versus state, but also many ways how to deal with encryption that we are going to talk during, I presume, in the conversation we have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so let's start by kind of going a little bit more into that element of balance. So governments often talk about finding this balance between security and privacy, as you mentioned, and they say that to find that balance, they need exceptional access or a backdoor for critical investigations, sometimes using different language. But from your experience, can you talk a little bit more about what are like the hidden, more long-term security costs of creating vulnerabilities? And on a technical level, like what is the problem with creating exceptional access or backdoors to encryption?
The first point which I would like to say is that are the law enforcement officers using the entire data rightfully and considerably to the extent that it can help tracing the act, whether it's of terrorism, whether it's of crime. And I've often seen that in the cases, if you get the entire metadata, you're able to do. In fact, as you would recall, there is a study done all over the world of 325 law enforcement officers, and which has clearly stated that breaking the encryption need not be the ultimate solution. But if you look at the metadata very, very carefully, then you can analyze a lot of things which give up very, very good information. In fact, the problem here is that our police is not able to exploit that metadata, and therefore it is important for the industrial cooperation. And in many cases, I have seen that there is a kind of a divide. The kind of cooperation which is required between the industry and police is often not there because each is in its own domain. So this is the first part which I would say that if we get into that very seriously, then it can definitely be done. Secondly, the other problem is that can there be a backdoor? If you see the experience, I mean, I'm talking about experiments which have been done. The Clippers chip, what happened in the 90s, and what a what a faux pas it was. And it was during Clinton's time, who's the greatest Democrat. You have seen what has happened to the digital security architecture in the case of Greece, where millions of data just escaped from the servers. So the point is, if we cannot have a backdoor without completely breaking the security architecture, should we do it when it is affecting millions of people? Because that itself, I think, constitutes a bigger national security, Tom. And that is why, because of these two reasons, I'm against weakening encryption.
Well, thank you, Yasho. And I want to touch on something that you said that really recalled a conversation that we had yesterday. So during one of the events yesterday, Mallory Knodel hosted a conversation with Jim Baker, the former general counsel of the Federal Bureau of Investigation of the United States, and Professor Alan Woodward, who's formerly associated with GCHQ, or the UK's main signals intelligence apparatus. And one of the things that they talked about was that sometimes this conversation about creating exceptional access or backdoors is kind of like a false narrative or a stand-in for a much more difficult conversation about other investigative techniques that might be available to law enforcement. So you talked about, the ways that police might be able to use metadata or other investigations. What are your thoughts on this kind of question? Is the idea that we should weaken encryption maybe a scapegoat or like an easier stand-in conversation than a much more difficult conversation about how we actually tackle really important problems in our online society?
No, absolutely. There are other ways of doing investigation. I'm talking purely about the technical aspects and the professional aspects of the game. Weakening encryption is in fact a very easy kind of a target, because you get on to the service providers and tell them that we want to, for traceability, for example. This is the most important thing which is happening in our country. And most of the law enforcement teams, they want the origin of the message trail which is going here and there. And the service providers are saying that we cannot, and it needs a breaking of the encryption, whereas some people have the view that no, it may not. Now, there are other ways, and these are professional and technical ways, Tom, of getting the kind of conversation which you want to, which you may get by through getting a judicial warrant or an executive warrant. But targeting encryption, I think it's a kind of an easy way out, and it completely denies the greater damage, the what you call the opportunity cost, which impacts the public. So I'm never in favor of it, and I think it's a devastating loss which will cause. In fact, I may also suggest here, Tom, that there are certain scientists in certain countries, one is in ours too, says that backdoors are possible without weakening the system. If it was, I mean, I don't think the Apple or the WhatsApp would bat an eyelid doing it. So I think it's something much more serious, and I think we should not handle this thing in a frivolous manner, like giving backdoors or giving the decryption keys.
Mhm. Yeah, and Yasha, maybe before we go a little bit too much further on kind of like the long-term consequences of weakening encryption, I want to talk a little bit specifically about the situation in India. You mentioned a little bit about originator traceability, and also we've received a question kind of about the India Information Technology Act and Section 69. Could you maybe just talk a little bit about what is like the on-the-ground situation in India? What are some of the policy proposals that are put forward? And what would be the consequences of acting on these policies?
Well, there's a raging debate in our country about weakening of encryption and weakening of the national security architecture. In fact, my think tank, Deep Strat, had written an article which you would read perhaps, and the dialogue, which gave a succinct picture of what exactly is happening. Now, Section 69 of the IT says that the government, of course, has the powers to sort of get the information what they want, and therefore they can impede any of the service providers to do that. And the rules have been framed accordingly. But as rightly said by the WhatsApp or the other people, that technically it is not possible. So even if the servers don't know that what is the kind of a conversation which is going on, or what is the kind of messaging which is going on. So the Section 69 so far has been used only to get the entire metadata, to get the normal chats and the SMS, etc. But the effort is on. And the effort is also on because while GDPR has made the rights-centric kind of a policy, the others like Tola or in other places, there's a huge amount of information which is already being collected. So that has given the Indian government also that there are precedents. There are other nations also who are asking for more and more access, and that is where the debate lies. But I would say that many of these issues have gone to the courts also. Courts have also sort of held back, given decisions. So there's a kind of an uncertainty which is prevailing. But so far, luckily, no breaking of the encryption architecture is there, which is lucky so far.
Yeah, I mean, lucky and hopefully, that's why we have to continue with pressure to say that you can't undermine encryption, right? So that hopefully that doesn't come to fruition. So maybe taking a little bit of a step back again and talking a little bit more about the big picture, I want to kind of redirect towards threats from other state actors that might be posed by weakening encryption. We often focus on how encryption could be used to affects investigations into individual criminal acts or individual acts of suspected terrorism. But what about the other side of national security, defending against sophisticated state-sponsored cyber attacks? Like in the US, we had Salt Typhoon last year. Um, can you talk a little bit more about how a country's own hostility towards domestic encryption makes it vulnerable to foreign adversaries who might decide to target critical infrastructure, government communications, or other critical systems?
Yes, I think that's a very important point to raise in the favor of keeping the national security intact with the help of strong encryption standards. Today, I can name China, which has official PLA hackers who are breaking into the system. We've had examples of even our greatest, the best health institute, All India Medical Institute, which website was down, and it created a havoc for a couple of weeks. The crucial, what you call the crucial sector, electricity, the energy sector was targeted in Mumbai. And so, therefore, the government knows very well the importance of strong encryption, whether it's with the government agencies, and most important are public sector units, which we call are at the commanding heights. They're controlling the key sectors, energy, and that's why it's very, very important to keep the encryption standards very high. In this respect, I think there has to be more and more chat between the law enforcement, because it's the law enforcement which is getting into the game. It is the certain there are so many qualified men who are indulging in both the counteroffensive and also the defensive approaches. And that is why it's extremely important to preserve the theory of encryption. And it is also related to our democracy, where we are not only talking about the defense of the national security. After all, does not mean only defense of the country, but it also means the overall security. And when these key sectors are being impacted, that actually tells you why encryption is so important.
Mhm. Well, and beyond just the purely tactical debate, let's discuss then that role of the broader societal impacts. And especially, I know something that you're interested in is societal trust. So much of our modern life, from private communications to financial security, also relies on the mathematical certainty of encryption. It's not just national security, it's our day-to-day lives that rely on this. So, what are the ethical and social consequences of a government deciding to weaken this fundamental trust mechanisms? And having seen governance from both a security and a transparency perspective in your work as the Central Information Commissioner, how does attacking encryption and reshape the real relationship between a citizen and a state in the digital age?
That's huge, Tom. That's huge. In fact, the ethical dimension which you have talked about is really huge. When the Aadhaar leak took place in 2018, it was devastating. Somebody, a whistleblower or some correspondent, went to a particular person, paid the money, and it could leak out millions of data. You can imagine the kind of trust deficit which took place, that if you're given one identity card by the government and your entire data leaks out, would you like any kind of a data leaked out about your family, about your visits, about your chats, about people who are dear and near? Therefore, this ethical dimension of democracy which we are talking about is very, very critical. What we talk about, our preferences, our tastes, and that's one of the reasons why the Data Protection Board was created, so that if the industry plays around with that, if leaks your addresses, leaks your information, then it's at a huge cost to you personally. And that is why I think that the governments today, at least the democracies today, owe it to the people that you have encryption, because encryption means trust. In a digital world, it is a pillar of strength. And if you don't have this pillar of strength, then democracies will actually fade away and you'll have a surveillance society. And by the way, Tom, one more very important thing, which I forgot to mention it between. Whenever you're talking about this right to privacy, right to encryption, it also, you cannot not talk about it without mentioning surveillance. What kind of surveillance systems you have? Should it be a surveillance only by the executive? No, it has to be tempered by a kind of an oversight. It has to be tempered by a judicial oversight. If you talk about democracy, then it is the judicial oversight you have to talk about. And that is what I say will ensure that this trust is there, the ethical dimension of preserving a digital world is also there.
Yash, I couldn't have said it any better myself. And I think that's a really great framing as we look ahead to this next year of the Global Encryption Coalition and this advocacy, keeping in mind that like this is a pillar, it's a foundation, and we must preserve it. And it affects so many different aspects of our civil rights and civil liberties. And we always have to keep that in mind. Yasho, as we close out here, I want to mention that you've seen this debate from both sides as the top security official and an information commissioner and civil rights advocate. So, as we close, what is your final message to global policymakers who believe that they must weaken encryption to ensure public safety? And really, to tease it out here, based on your experiences, What is the most profound risk that they are failing to consider? And why is upholding strong encryption the only truly secure path forward for a modern democracy?
I would, in fact, appeal to the prime ministers and the presidents of various democracies that if you don't maintain encryption, you are losing the faith, you're losing the support of the people, because people's privacy is perhaps the constitutional right which has not been given now but for centuries. In fact, I would suggest to the various governments of the world to look into the quantum computers now, which are a threat to encryption. They should look at technologies ahead that which are not able to destroy encryption, because encryption so far is the only savior for privacy which is natural right, which is our constitutional right. And therefore, to work ways around the encryption, to have the law enforcement agencies get as much information as possible from the metadata, have the industry cooperate with the law enforcement bodies so you get better results, and have one more thing, better international relations in terms of whether extradition treaty, whether so many other things which you can have, which will facilitate a better transfer of criminals across the countries rather than information being vetted out of your hapless citizens.
Yasho, thank you so much for your time. It's been a true pleasure to speak with you today and in the weeks in preparation here. Um, I also just want to say a thank you to everyone, especially the team at ISOC who has helped put on this wonderful Global Encryption Day Summit. And here's to the year ahead, to continuing efforts to protect and promote encryption as a fundamental pillar of both privacy and security in our modern digital age. Thank you all so much and be well.
Thanks, Tom. All the best.